make their last-minute appeals for votes as millions of Americans prepare for the only poll that counts.
We are going to pull off one of the biggest surprises in political history.
In the end, it's a race between the courage to change and the comfort of the status quo.
We will landslide this thing if the people vote their conscience.
And another surprise decision from Magic Johnson. Tonight, why Magic is quitting basketball again. This is the CBS Evening News. Good evening. Dan Rather reporting. On this night before the election, frontrunner Bill Clinton is dreaming of victory, incumbent George Bush dreaming of an upset, and if you believe the polls, independent Ross Perot is just dreaming. A poll taken over the weekend by CBS News and the New York Times indicates that the Clinton-Gore ticket may have had a 10-point lead over Bush-Quayle when the poll was taken. Perot-Stockdale was the choice in this poll of 16% of likely voters. The undecided vote was believed in the area of 2% when the poll was taken. Now, the polls reflect the popular vote if indeed they reflect anything. More important is the state-by-state battle for electoral votes. That's what decides the election. Take a look at the map. It takes 270 electoral votes to win. CBS News estimates that Governor Clinton may be ahead in 22 states and the District of Columbia. That would mean a total of 293 electoral votes if he won in all these states, 23 more than he needs. President Bush may be leading in 8 states with a total of 62 electoral votes. The remaining states with 183 electoral votes are rated too close to call. Ross Perot trails in every state contest. Let's pause and note that elections are not decided by polls, they are decided by votes. Clinton's lead in the polls did not keep him from making a final and frenzied campaign swing, one that won't end until tomorrow when he finally goes home to Little Rock. Correspondent Richard Threlkeld is there.
Dan, after 13 months of running for president, Bill Clinton's voice finally gave out just as he was starting a 4,000-mile campaign tour. So today he was more seen than heard.
One more day. One more day.
Clinton managed to hit almost all the battleground states in the East and Midwest, all of them for the umpteenth time.
A lot of the best moments of this campaign have come in Pennsylvania. My fellow Americans, some of the most memorable moments of this campaign have occurred in Ohio. We can do it if tomorrow Michigan leads the way. Thank you.
From Michigan, the schedule today and all night tonight was St. Louis, Paducah, 2 stops in Texas, Albuquerque, Denver, and then home. The kickoff for all this was last night in New Jersey at the biggest, most elaborate Clinton rally yet, to the tune of what's become his theme song, Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow. And to give voters something to think about, the campaign's airing some new last-minute commercials, reminiscent of Ronald Reagan's old feel-good Morning in America spots from a dozen years ago.
Something's happening out there, a feeling. Call it hope.
The good news for Clinton in the latest CBS News New York Times poll is that more voters in our sample think Clinton will bring about needed change than either George Bush or Ross Perot. The not-so-good news is that more than half worry that a President Clinton might make serious mistakes. Almost half say Mr. Bush might, too, and 2/3 think Ross Perot might. Today, Clinton was struggling to put those doubts to rest.
We're all in this together. We're going up or down together, and I am going to work as hard as I can to challenge you to assume responsibility, to build a new future, and then to empower you to seize control over your own destiny. That's what this election's all about. We've had enough neglect.
By tonight, Clinton had made it to St. Louis and beyond.
Clinton always likes to campaign on election day, so he's due back here in Little Rock at midday tomorrow to cast his own vote for president. Dan?
Thanks, Dick. President Bush spent the last day of his campaign blasting Governor Clinton in several states. The president has been calling his opponents, quote, crazy and, quote, bozo. There was no let-up today in the president's slashing attacks on Clinton. Susan Spencer is with the president.
Indeed, there wasn't any let-up, Dan. Mr. Bush was on a blitz, a 6-state blitz with 108 electoral votes at stake. He was urging his supporters and all voters to ignore the polls completely, and especially to ignore those hated talking heads. This last-minute blitz was designed to hit states whose electoral votes he needs and where he still may be in trouble: New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Louisiana, and yes, even Texas. The president is said to be totally fed up with the polls, both because they show him far behind and also because he honestly doesn't believe that in the end voters will reject an incumbent president who won a war for a man that he likes to call the failed governor of a small state. Mr. Bush did not let up on his slash and burn tactics this last campaign day. He accused Governor Clinton of planning to raise taxes on the middle class. He called him slippery when wet and said he lies to the American people.
You cannot lie to the American people. Here's a man, Governor Clinton, whose own hometown newspaper says he's a politician utterly without principle, a guy whose supporters gave him the name Slick. We didn't invent that. It came out of the Democratic primary out of Arkansas. And that's, I say slippery when wet. Little difference, but the same thing. But the pattern of deception is what's troubling the American people. They see it on term limits. They see it on North American Free Trade Agreement. They see it on taxes. They see it on these environmental standards. I think we ought to think about the working man and the working woman and have good environment without going to the extreme like the ozone man wants.
The Bush campaign is, of course, talking upset. Mr. Bush will come here tonight. Tomorrow night there will be a victory celebration here in the Astrodome, but privately very few aides think there'll be much to celebrate. Dan?
Susan Spencer live at the scene of the Republican National Convention in Houston. Ross Perot spent the last day of his campaign at home base in Dallas. More about that now from Bill Lagatuta. Bill?
Dan, the polls do not look very good, but Ross Perot today didn't seem to care. He used this final day of the campaign to take one last poke at all those who've called him crazy.
See, I've got a theme song for our campaign, and here it comes. Just listen to it.
We're crazy.
And with that, Perot turned his last campaign stop into a dance party.
So lonely.
A moment that was vintage Perot. So too was this final burst of bravado.
We will landslide this thing if the people vote their conscience.
But in this hometown arena, there were more empty seats than full. A metaphor for this campaign's worst-case scenario, that at the last minute, Perot's army will desert him and go with a more likely winner, which is why Perot spent the weekend blasting away at Bill Clinton.
Do you believe that it's appropriate to senior government officials who have used drugs?
Clinton got his in one of Perot's chart shows.
You know, the chickens keep on clucking and the people keep on plucking after 12 years of Governor Clinton's leadership.
There was also Perot being Perot on MTV.
Just getting drunk, getting high, getting laid, and getting pregnant is not the key to a great new country.
And for good measure, another feisty encounter with reporters.
Does anybody have a significant question, or is this got to be the usual mindless press conference? If it is, I'm going to bed.
But having gotten all that out of his system, Perot today seemed at peace with the world, like the genial host of the party at the end of the party, who wanted to make sure his guests had a good time before wishing them good night. And Perot has now come closest ever to admitting one of the real reasons he got back into the race was to clear his name. If you remember anything about me once this is over, he now says, at least remember I gave you a world-class campaign. Translation, see, I wasn't a quitter. Dan?
Bill Lagatuta in Dallas, thanks. Our Campaign 92 coverage continues. In a moment, CBS News will talk with some of these so-called swing voters who could, if it's close, decide this election.
I am a father of 6 and a firefighter and a paramedic, so I require a great deal of energy.
Steve Cook discovers breakfast with Grape Nuts for a week.
Grape Nuts kept me going. Every single morning I felt good.
Grape Nuts, the fat-free natural energy source.
I love Grape Nuts. I like the fact that it stayed crunchy in the milk. I'm sold on the Grape Nuts, and I'll stick with the Grape Nuts forever.
Breakfast with Post-Grape Nuts cereal helps keep you going strong all morning long.
I think after a week, anyone would be sold on Grape Nuts.
1, 2, 3, 4. for the minor aches and pains of your daily workout. Introducing Therapeutic Mineral Ice Plus, a lotion that goes on cool to relieve your pain. Mineral Ice Plus also contains a moisturizer, so it soothes your skin as it cools your pain. Therapeutic Mineral Ice Plus. Tell your pain to cool it.
Michigan is considered one of the big swing states in the presidential election, a key battleground for the Bush and Clinton campaigns, as well as for Perot. And nowhere in Michigan is the battle hotter than in Macomb County. Correspondent Mark Phillips paid a return visit there today to find out what voters are thinking on this eve of the election.
It was Ross Perot, after all, who said people should measure twice and cut once in deciding the future of the country. And here in the most battled-over state in the Union, Michigan, Marty Dove, the contractor, was doing just that, although his vote isn't going Perot's way.
I'm definitely going to vote for Clinton.
Why did you decide that?
I just think it's time for a change in our country.
You may remember Marty. He was part of a discussion group of undecided voters we eavesdropped on a few weeks ago to gauge public concerns.
Let's talk about the issues. Let's really hear what they've got to say.
The group was from Macomb County, that crucial swing district outside of Detroit that's probably gotten more attention than any other in the country. Deborah Thompson, a school cafeteria worker, was leaning toward Bush.
Basically, I'm impressed with his moral issues, disappointed in his political stances.
But she's still going for Bush.
It's basically somebody who is more family-orientated and along my thoughts.
Although her choice was made more difficult because of the president's high-volume name-calling campaign.
Being attacked on character by Governor Clinton is like being called ugly by a frog.
I just felt it took some of the integrity and character away from my choice.
Two other group members who were torn between George Bush and Ross Perot now say they're for Perot. The final count, though, was for Clinton.
We can do it if tomorrow Michigan leads the way.
Although Bill Johnson, an auto industry maintenance manager, and his family seem to sum up the lack of complete enthusiasm for the choice.
Not as comfortable as I'd like. It's a little bit pie in the sky to think that he's going to do these things and it's not going to cost me something. It's going to cost something. I'm just hoping it's something that we can all afford.
There was one facet of the campaign, though, on which everyone agreed. They're glad it's over.
I'm tired of all the mudslinging, the shots in the dark. You know, let's get it over with. Let's get this election done and let's get these guys off the air.
The way Macomb County, Michigan goes is supposed to be a sign of the way the country goes tomorrow, but this has been an election campaign full of as yet unproven assumptions. Tomorrow, at last, the assuming and the opinion polling and the arguing and perhaps even the name-calling will stop, and the voting will finally begin. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Detroit.
The U.S. presidential election is being followed closely overseas. It's illegal to make book on elections in this country, but in British betting parlors today, Bill Clinton was listed as close to a sure thing. This is by the British. Bookmakers offer odds of 1 to 8 on Clinton, meaning you have to bet $8 to win 1. George Bush is listed in Britain as a 4 to 1 long shot, and Ross Perot 100 to 1. It's a safe bet that whoever is elected president will have to deal with trouble in the banking system. Just today, 2 Texas banks were reopened under the control of federal regulators. The banks were seized Friday from First City Bank Corp., one of the biggest banking companies in Texas. It's the second bailout for First City in just 4 years. Time now for our weekly update on America's charge account, otherwise known as the U.S. national debt. At last report, the United States of America owes more than $4,067 billion. That's $5 billion more than we owed last week. Coming up next on your CBS Evening News, the final buzzer for Magic Johnson's career. We'll tell you what ended Magic's dream of a return.
Missing in action. What really happened?
We want the truth.
How far would you go to find out? 48 Hours, Wednesday.